The FBI is confusing violence for free speech and free speech for violence. Hello, I'm James Morrow, and you're watching Busting the Narrative. This week's narrative is a twofer. The first narrative we are busting is one that says the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution protects the rights of Americans to speak out against their government. The second one we are busting says that the FBI is a nonpartisan law enforcement agency devoted to protecting those very same rights mentioned in the Constitution. Well, not so fast, because, as it turns out, in Biden's America, neither one of those claims holds water. Instead, it turns out your right to speak now depends very much on which side of politics you are on. And the question of whether you wind up hearing a knock at the door now depends on whether you've offended the wrong people by speaking up too loudly. Let me explain. I want you first to cast your mind back to last year. In the wake of George Floyd's death, the streets exploded with violence, much of it done or fomented by or in the name of a group with the innocent-sounding name Black Lives Matter. Billions of dollars in property was destroyed. More than a dozen people were killed. The downtowns of countless American cities and towns were burnt out, all in the name of racial justice. At the same time this was happening, Antifa, again a group with an innocent-sounding name that is nothing more than an abbreviation for anti-fascist, was holding cities like Portland and Seattle to ransom, setting up so-called autonomous zones where rape and murder were the order of the day, and harassing anyone and attacking anyone who refused to support them, including journalists who all too often shamefully stayed silent because they didn't want to bust that narrative about Antifa being just a bunch of peaceful scamps interested in social justice. You would think that this sort of thing would be the kind of activity the FBI would be keen to get on top of, yes? Not so fast. Have a listen to what happened when South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace asked the FBI about this in a congressional hearing this week.
Under the anti-government category or subcategory of domestic terrorism, would that include groups like Antifa or Black Lives Matter?
Seems like this would be a pretty straightforward question for law enforcement to answer, right? Wrong.
Well, we don't identify groups, but individuals' actions. So if individuals are committing actions that would be in furtherance of anti-government or anarchist ideals, then they would fall into that category.
So would you quantify Antifa as an anarchist group then under that subcategory? I mean, it's an anarchist group, right? Or related?
There are individuals, I think the director has previously described them as a movement, and there have been individuals that have associated or identified with Antifa that have conducted violent acts that we would categorize as anarchist.
How many acts of violence or domestic terrorism has Antifa committed over the last 2 years?
Since we don't categorize Antifa, nor do we calculate or collate information regarding Antifa, that movement, we don't have that.
No, you see, Antifa's not an organization, not a big threat, they say. Nothing for the FBI to worry about. Not when there are much bigger criminals out there, like, parents who care about their children's education. Yes, that's right. The FBI has now been brought in to investigate, wait for it, parents who have protested against the schools indoctrinating their kids with radical progressive propaganda and critical race theory garbage. In a letter to the director of the FBI this week, Attorney General Merrick Garland asked that the law enforcement agency start investigating supposed threats allegedly made to educators in schools by parents upset about what is going on in the classroom. Of course, he provided no evidence for what he called a, quote, disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence. No reports of actual incidents, nothing to back up what amounts to an attempt to use the very power of the state to chill dissent. This is sinister, sinister stuff, and it amounts to nothing short of the Biden administration using a federal law enforcement agency, the FBI, as the enforcement arm of the Democrat Party and their supporters in the teachers' unions. It suggests that violent street thugs have First Amendment rights to destroy property and worse in the name of their cause, but peaceful Americans don't when it comes to protecting their children. In the bizarro world of the Biden administration, everyone is a terrorist, except the terrorists. Thanks for watching, and if you want to support these videos, like, share, and subscribe below. I'll see you next week.